The Bruised Cook. The morning sun stretched across the wide Wyoming valley, gilding the hills and casting long shadows over the Kane Ranch. The place was a kingdom of its own. Thousands of acres of pasture, 100 head of cattle, a dozen horses, and the biggest ranch house this side of Cheyenne. And at the center of it all was Elias Kane. Folks called him the Giant Rancher. He stood a head taller than most men, his shoulders broad as a barn door, his hands the size of shovels. His beard was thick and black, his eyes a steady gray that rarely betrayed emotion. For all his size, Elias was a quiet man, slow to anger, steady as stone. He had inherited the land from his father and built it into one of the most prosperous ranches in Silver Creek. But prosperity didn't make for happiness. Elias was a solitary figure. He had ranch hands, true enough, but none stayed under his roof. The only person who shared his home was Martha Hale. Martha wasn't kin, but she might as well have been family. She had come to him 3 years back, widowed young when her husband died in a railroad accident. She was 28 then, with kind hazel eyes and a way of keeping a house running smooth as a Swiss clock. Elias had taken her on as cook and housekeeper, and though he never said it aloud, her presence softened the loneliness of the big house. That morning, Elias finished his rounds early. He strode into the kitchen, ducking slightly under the doorway as he always did. The smell of fresh biscuits and coffee filled the room. Martha stood at the stove, her apron tied snugly, her brown hair pinned back neat as ever. "Morning, Miss Hale," Elias rumbled. She glanced back at him with a quick smile. "Mr. Kane, you're back sooner than usual. Coffee's fresh." He nodded and poured himself a mug, lowering his huge frame into the chair that looked too small beneath him. He noticed she moved a little stiffly, her back not as straight as usual. "Everything all right?" he asked, casual. She hesitated just a second before nodding. "Of course. Just a long walk into town yesterday for supplies." Elias grunted. Martha often went into town alone. She liked choosing her own flour, her own spices, her own cuts of meat from the butcher. Still, something seemed off. He tore a biscuit in half, slathering it with butter. That's when he saw it. As Martha reached for a skillet, her sleeve slipped back. Her arm bore a deep purple bruise, ugly against her pale skin. Elias froze, his biscuit forgotten. "Martha," he said, his voice low, "what happened to your arm?" She jolted, tugging her sleeve back down. "It's nothing. Just a knock against the wagon." Elias's gray eyes sharpened. "That's no wagon bruise." She turned back to the stove, avoiding his gaze. "Mr. Kane, I'd rather you not fuss." He rose from his chair, his towering shadow stretching across the kitchen. "Martha," he said firmly, "look at me." Slowly, she faced him. That's when he saw the second mark, the faint swelling along her cheekbone, half hidden beneath a strand of hair. Elias's jaw clenched. He had seen bruises like that before, deliberate from a man's fist. His great hands curled into fists at his sides. "Who did this?" he demanded. Her lips trembled. She tried to speak, then faltered. Finally, in a whisper, "It was Deputy Cray." The name hit Elias like a hammer. Silas Cray, the sheriff's right-hand man. A bully of a fellow, full of swagger, known for shaking down saloon girls and throwing his weight around. Elias had never cared for him, but until now, he hadn't had reason to act. "What for?" Elias pressed, though he dreaded the answer. Martha's eyes filled with tears. She fought hard to blink away. "He cornered me behind the general store. Said a woman like me had no business turning down his attention. I told him I wasn't interested. He grabbed me, tore at my dress. When I pushed him off, he struck me." Her voice cracked. She turned back to the stove, furiously stirring at the pot as if the motion could erase what had been done. Elias's chest burned hot, his breath heavy. For a long moment he said nothing, his massive frame rigid with contained fury. When he spoke, his voice was like distant thunder. "He laid hands on you." She nodded, unable to meet his gaze. Elias reached up, pulling his hat from the peg by the door. "Where are you going?" she asked quickly, alarm in her tone. "Town," Elias said flatly. "Mr. Kane, please, don't. You'll make it worse." Her plea stopped him at the threshold. He turned, his eyes like storm clouds. Worse. She nodded desperately. He's the law here. The sheriff will stand by him no matter what. If you raise a hand, they'll come after you. I couldn't bear to see you locked up because of me. Elias studied her for a long moment. The fear in her voice, the bruises on her skin, the way she shrank from the thought of justice, it lit a fire inside him hotter than any he'd ever known. He walked back to her, placing one of his enormous hands gently on her shoulder. "Martha," he said, softer now, "no man puts hands on you and walks away smiling. Not while I draw breath." She shook her head, tears spilling freely now. "Elias." He squeezed her shoulder lightly, then stepped back. "You're under my roof. That makes you under my protection. I don't care if it's the sheriff himself. They'll answer for this." For a moment, silence filled the kitchen, broken only by the hiss of the skillet. Martha wiped her eyes, her hands trembling. Deep down, a part of her had always known Elias Kane was a man of principle. But she'd never seen him like this, his gray eyes burning, his jaw set like granite. It frightened her, and yet, strangely, it comforted her too. Because for the first time since Silas Cray cornered her, she felt safe. That night, after the ranch hands had gone to bed and the lamps were blown out, Elias stood alone on the porch. The stars burned bright overhead, but he saw nothing of their beauty. His mind was set. He had tolerated corruption in town before, turned a blind eye to the sheriff's petty graft and his deputy's drunken swagger. But this was different. They had laid hands on his cook. On Martha, who had worked by his side for 3 years, who kept his house warm and his belly fed, who brought a gentle light to his otherwise lonely home. That was a line no man crossed. Elias Kane, the giant rancher, stared into the dark horizon and made his vow. By this time tomorrow, Silas Cray would regret the day he ever raised a hand against Martha Hale. The rancher's fury. Morning broke over Silver Creek with a clear sky, but the giant rancher carried a storm inside him. Elias Kane saddled his big black gelding, Thunder, just after sunrise. The ranch hands noticed his grim face and kept their distance, though whispers trailed behind him. When Martha saw him by the hitching post, her heart leapt. She hurried out, her apron still on, hands dusted with flour. "Elias, please," she said, her voice pleading. "Don't go. You'll make enemies you can't fight." He turned in the saddle, towering over her. "Martha, I fought men twice as mean and twice as many. But this ain't about me. It's about right and wrong. If I let that deputy go on, he'll do it again, to you, or to someone else's daughter." Her eyes shimmered with worry. "You don't understand. The sheriff will protect him. No one will stand with you." Elias's gray eyes softened for just a heartbeat. He leaned down, his voice low and steady. "Then I'll stand alone." He touched his hat and nudged Thunder forward, leaving Martha clutching her apron as he rode down the dirt road into town. The town watches. Silver Creek wasn't much more than a main street lined with wooden buildings, a saloon, a mercantile, the blacksmith, a church at one end, the sheriff's office at the other. Dust rose in little puffs as Elias's horse clomped down the street. Heads turned. Shopkeepers paused mid-sale. The blacksmith straightened from his anvil. Mothers pulled their children close. Everyone knew the giant rancher, but never had they seen him ride with such a look on his face, stone cold, like judgment itself had come to town. He dismounted in front of the sheriff's office. The porch boards groaned beneath his weight as he strode inside. The confrontation. Sheriff Hobart was a barrel-chested man in his 50s, graying mustache, eyes always calculating. He looked up from his desk as Elias entered, followed by gasps from 2 men playing cards in the corner. Silas Cray lounged against the wall, boots propped on a chair, hat tilted low. When he saw Elias, a smirk tugged at his lips. "Well, if it ain't the giant himself," Cray drawled. "What brings you to town, Kane? Come to pay your taxes, or maybe buy yourself a proper shirt that fits." The room chuckled nervously. Elias didn't so much as blink. He stopped in the center of the office, his shadow swallowing the room. "You laid hands on Martha Hale," he said, voice low and steady. "You're going to answer for it." The sheriff shifted in his chair. "Now hold on, Kane. That's a mighty big accusation. Elias's eyes never left Cray. "It ain't an accusation. It's the truth. I saw the bruises." Cray leaned forward, his smirk widening. "Bruises? You mean the ones from when she fell against the wagon? Poor little widow's clumsy, is all." Elias's massive fists clenched. "She told me what you did." The room went dead quiet. The sheriff cleared his throat. "Now, Kane, women get confused sometimes. Maybe she—" Elias's voice boomed, cutting him off. "Don't you dare call her a liar." The card players froze, their hands hovering over the table. Outside, faces pressed against the windows. Word was spreading fast. Cray stood, swaggering toward Elias. "Big man thinks he can play judge and jury, huh? Well, you ain't the law around here." "I am." "You're filth," Elias growled. Cray's hand twitched near his pistol. "Careful, Kane. You don't want to start something you can't finish." But Elias didn't wait. The brawl. Like a thunderclap, Elias moved. His huge hand shot out, seizing Cray by the front of his shirt. With one yank, he hauled the deputy clean off his feet and hurled him through the office doors. Wood splintered as Cray crashed into the street, rolling in the dust. Gasps and shouts erupted as townsfolk scattered. Elias stepped onto the porch, his shadow falling over Cray as the deputy scrambled to his knees. Cray yanked his pistol, but Elias kicked it from his grip, the gun skittering into the gutter. Then Elias's fist came down, one brutal blow that sent blood spraying from Cray's mouth. "You touched her," Elias thundered, his voice carrying down the whole street. "Say it. In front of everyone." Cray groaned, spitting blood. I didn't." Another punch drove him into the dirt. "Say it." Elias roared. The crowd had gathered now, half the town watching, wide-eyed. Shopkeepers, saloon girls, ranch hands, even children clinging to their mothers. They watched the giant rancher mete out justice. Cray, coughing, finally croaked, "I did it. I tried to take her. She fought me off." A murmur swept the crowd, shock and anger mixing. Elias hauled him upright by the collar, blood dripping from Cray's nose. "Hear that?" he bellowed to the townsfolk. "That's your deputy. That's the kind of men you let wear a badge." The sheriff burst onto the porch, face red. "That's enough, Kane. Let him go." Elias turned, his glare pinning Hobart like a nail. "You knew what kind of man he was, and you let him." For once, the sheriff had no reply. The silence of the townsfolk weighed heavy. Elias dropped Cray into the dirt like a sack of feed. The deputy whimpered, his swagger gone, his face bloodied. Elias pointed a massive finger at the sheriff. "You come near Martha Hale again, any of you, I'll bury this town under my fists. You hear me?" His words rolled like thunder, and not a soul doubted him. Aftermath. Elias turned and strode to his horse, mounting with one smooth motion. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Some nodded with quiet respect. Others whispered in awe. As he rode out, mothers held their daughters a little tighter, and men tipped their hats. By the time Elias reached the ranch, word of what had happened had already beaten him there. The ranch hands greeted him with wide eyes and claps on the back. But it was Martha who stood on the porch, wringing her hands, her face pale. When Elias dismounted, she rushed to him. "Elias, you're not hurt?" He shook his head. "Not a scratch." Her eyes searched his face, torn between fear and gratitude. "What did you do?" He met her gaze, voice steady. "Made him confess. In front of the whole town. They know now. They'll remember." Tears filled her eyes, but this time they weren't from fear. "You didn't have to do that for me." Elias reached out, gently brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. His rough hand lingered, tender despite its size. "Yes, I did," he said simply. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the air between them charged with something neither dared name. Finally, Martha whispered, "What if they come after you?" Elias's eyes hardened. "Then let them try." That night, the ranch was quiet, but Silver Creek was not. In the saloon, voices rose. Some hailed Elias Kane as a hero. Others warned he had made dangerous enemies. And in the sheriff's office, Silas Cray nursed his swollen face while Sheriff Hobart muttered, "We'll get him back. Him, and that woman he thinks he can protect." The storm wasn't over. It had only begun. What the town never forgot. The weeks that followed were uneasy ones. Life on Cane Ranch carried on as it always had, cattle to drive, fences to mend, horses to break, but beneath the rhythm of daily work, a sense of tension lingered. Martha did her best to hide it. She hummed as she worked in the kitchen, smiled at the hands, and pretended her bruises no longer ached. But Elias saw the way her eyes darted whenever a rider appeared on the horizon. He noticed how she locked the doors at dusk, her hands trembling on the bolts. He tried to reassure her. "They won't touch you again, Martha. Not while I'm here." But deep down, Elias knew men like Sheriff Hobart and Silas Cray wouldn't swallow their pride so easily. A deputy humiliated in front of the whole town? A sheriff exposed for shielding corruption? That kind of disgrace demanded payback. And payback came, as sure as the snows in winter. The riders at dusk. It was a cool evening when the storm finally broke. Elias was in the barn, rubbing down thunder after a long ride, when one of his hands, young Tom, came running, pale as milk. "Mr. Cane. Riders. A dozen of 'em. Comin' fast." Elias straightened, his gray eyes narrowing. He already knew who they were. He stepped out into the fading light. Dust rose on the horizon, the silhouettes of armed men cutting across the valley. At their head rode Sheriff Hobart, with Silas Cray beside him, his face still marked from Elias's fists. Martha appeared on the porch, her apron fluttering in the breeze. "Elias," she whispered. He strode toward her, his boots crunching on the dirt. "Get inside. Bolt the doors." "But—" "No buts." His voice was firm but gentle. "You stay safe here. This is between me and them." For a moment she looked as though she might argue, but then she nodded, her eyes shining with fear. She disappeared inside, the door closing behind her. Elias turned to his men, half a dozen ranch hands, tough but nervous. "They'll try to scare us. Don't break. Don't run. This is our land, and we stand on it together." They nodded, some clutching rifles, others pitchforks. They weren't soldiers, but they were loyal. And that mattered more than skill. The sheriff's ultimatum. The riders thundered into the yard, their horses snorting, dust swirling around them. Sheriff Hobart reined up, glaring down at Elias from the saddle. "Cane," he bucked, "you've gone too far. You beat my deputy half to death. You think you can humiliate the law in front of the whole town and get away with it?" Elias stood tall, his hands resting easily at his sides. "Your deputy's no lawman. He's a coward and a bully. And everyone knows it now." A ripple of anger ran through the men behind Hobart. Silas Cray snarled, his swollen face twisting. "You think you're some kind of hero? I'll put a bullet in you and take that woman for myself." At that, Elias's eyes went cold as ice. He stepped forward, his voice ringing like iron. "You so much as speak her name again, and I'll break you in two." The air crackled. The ranch hands shifted nervously. Sheriff Hobart raised his hand. "Enough talk. Cane, you're under arrest for assault. Come quietly, and maybe your men won't pay the price." Elias chuckled low, the sound more dangerous than laughter. "You can't arrest a man for telling the truth. And you sure as hell can't arrest me on my own land." Hobart's face purpled. He dropped his hand. "Get 'em, boys." The battle for the ranch. Chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked through the twilight. Ranch hands scrambled for cover, firing from behind hay bales and fence posts. Horses screamed, men shouted, bullets tore through wood. Elias moved like a force of nature. He grabbed a shotgun from the barn wall and fired, blasting a rider clean out of the saddle. Another charged at him with a pistol. Elias swung the shotgun like a club, knocking the man flat. Silas Cray came charging straight for the porch, shouting Martha's name. Elias saw him, rage surging like wildfire. He roared, tossing aside the empty shotgun, and charged. They collided in the dirt, Silas's pistol going off wild into the night sky. Elias's massive fist came down, again and again, until the deputy's cries turned into gurgles. "You'll never touch her," Elias thundered, slamming him into the ground. "Not while I breathe." Silas lay groaning, his fight gone, his body broken. Meanwhile, Sheriff Hobart dismounted, pulling his revolver. He spotted Elias and raised the gun. "This ends now, Cane." The shot rang out, but missed as Elias barreled into him like a bull. The revolver clattered away. The two men grappled in the dirt, the sheriff cursing, Elias silent and grim. Hobart swung wildly, but Elias's sheer strength overwhelmed him. He pinned the sheriff, his fist cocked back. "Law's supposed to protect the weak," Elias growled. "But you protect the ones who prey on him. That ends today." His punch landed like a hammer, breaking Hobart's nose. The sheriff cried out, blood pouring down his face. Elias hit him again, and again, until the man lay limp, wheezing. Around them, the fight sputtered to an end. The ranch hands had stood their ground. The riders who weren't shot or beaten had fled into the night. The yard was littered with groaning men and scattered weapons. Elias rose, towering over the broken sheriff, his chest heaving. "The town rises." Word spread fast, faster than wildfire. By dawn, half the town of Silver Creek had gathered at Cane Ranch, drawn by the news of the fight. Some came fearful, expecting to see a bloodthirsty rancher standing over corpses. Instead, they found Elias Kane calm and steady, watching over his men, tending to the wounded, even those who had come to kill him. The sheriff and deputy were dragged into town, battered but alive. And when the people heard the full truth, of Martha's bruises, of Cray's confession, of Hobart's corruption, they turned. By afternoon, the townsfolk filled the main street, demanding the sheriff's resignation. A preacher shouted from the steps of the church. Mothers cried for justice. Fathers swore they'd never let men like Hobart and Cray wear badges again. By nightfall, Hobart and Cray were in irons, bound for the federal marshal. Silver Creek would choose a new sheriff, one the people could trust. And the name on every lip was the same, Elias Kane, the giant rancher who had stood when no one else dared. The promise. Back at the ranch, the quiet of evening returned. The barns smoldered from stray fire, fences lay broken, but the land still stood. Martha moved through the wreckage, her eyes wide with awe. She found Elias on the porch, sitting heavily, his knuckles raw and bloodied. "You saved me," she whispered. He looked up, his gray eyes weary but gentle. "No, Martha. I did what any decent man should have done." She shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "No one else would have stood against them. But you did." He reached out, his rough hand cupping hers. "As long as you're under my roof, you'll never face harm alone again." Her voice trembled. "Elias, I don't want just your roof. I want you." For a long moment, he stared at her, his breath catching. Then he pulled her into his arms, holding her close against his broad chest. "I reckon you've had me all along," he murmured. What the town never forgot. The years rolled on. Cane Ranch grew stronger than ever, a symbol of safety in a hard land. Travelers spoke of it as a place where justice had been won, where a woman's honor was defended by a man who feared no one. Elias and Martha married in a small ceremony beneath the cottonwoods, attended by ranch hands and townsfolk alike. She became not just the cook of Cane Ranch, but its heart. Together they built a life filled with quiet joy, forged in the fire of that long night. And though many tales came and went in the Wyoming territory, one story lingered in every saloon and every church pew. How the giant rancher noticed his cook's torn dress and bruised face, how he stood against corruption and violence, and how the town of Silver Creek never forgot what Elias Kane did next.